from Primal again, and today we're going to learn how to make these. That's right, humbuckers. There's 3 of them here. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's just part of what we do here at Primal. Making your own pickups can be quite rewarding. In fact, once you get good at it, you can actually determine what the final sound is going to be. We're going to make our own pickups today. So you need a few things. You're going to need strippers like these, little snippers. You're going to need bobbins, like we're making humbuckers. So you need pole pieces and you need the screws. You'll need a bridge plate. I kind of like these maple spacers, but this is what a plastic one looks like, so we may have to use a plastic one on this side. Okay. Now we're going to do a 2-lead hookup, only because it's one pickup in the whole guitar, and we're not going to do any coil splitting. There's no reason for it. It's for the Eddie Van Halen tribute Little Guitars guitar. So we're going to use that. You're going to need a spacer for the screw side. This isn't the screw side, this is the screw side bobbin. And of course, we're going to use some 43 gauge wire. This is coated copper. You're going to need a small Phillips head, an X-Acto knife, and then a couple extra sets of fingers for when things get a little tiny for you. So this machine, you're also going to need a winder. I made this one. This one works really well. Basically, you have a digital counter which senses the magnet, so it tells you how many revolutions you've made. And we're going to make several thousand revolutions. It's important that you get an accurate count. But this is how it works. There's a variable speed DC motor in there, and of course a power converter. This is our guide, so we'll need to set this up right away. So our wire is going to go between, in fact, we're going to wind our screw side first. So this is 3-pound double-sided tape. It's plenty strong enough for this application. The first thing we want to do is we want to put a lead on our wire. Not everyone does it this way. I like it this way only because it gives me another level of strength. So for instance, if I were not to use the wire lead, there's a stronger chance of breaking the wire. So we're going to cut off 4. We're going to need a red, a black, that's for the first one, and then we're going to do a green and a yellow for the other one. So here's our wires. We're going to need some shrink tubing for that. So this lead we're going to put aside, our pickup lead. We'll put that aside because we won't need it till later. So everything we don't need till later, we're going to put aside so it's not in the way. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our wire lead here, our 43 gauge wire. We're going to do our red wire first. That's our start wire. You want to trim off enough to where what's going to happen. And it's very difficult to see because the wire is so thin. I'll try to get it in the right light. But you want to wind it around that small lead area of the wire right there. I'm just going to let that sit for a second right there. That's perfect. We just don't want it to fall because we're about to solder that on there. that's on, what we're going to do, and it's coated, so I don't know if it's necessary, but I like to trim it off just to keep it neat. We're going to trim off the piece of wire that's just kind of hanging out there. So from here, we'll just make sure we're still connected, because sometimes it's not. From here, and the only reason we're using the red shrink tubing is because you're not going to see it, or it doesn't have the possibility of being seen. So we just want to get that covered. Now to shrink that down, I'm just going to use the corner of our soldering iron here. Okay, that should be plenty. Good enough. Alright, so this is going over this side. Now we want to take, oops, that holds pretty darn good. Alright, so we're going to take this, we're going to tape it inside here. So we want to get ourselves a piece of this thin tape here. All we want to do is hold this in place. But we do want this to lay flat. That should be good enough for now. So now we want to stick this on here. You want to get it centered as much as you can, but we want to tape our lead down so it's not in the way. Okay, so we want to get a couple starts going. We're going to zero this right now. Okay, so one of the things we want to do when we're setting this up, so we're going to have to move this over a little bit this way. Still more. So your first bunch of ones are kind of going to be setting this up. That looks pretty good to me. Now we're going to work our way toward the outside. You want to keep light pressure on this, enough pressure to where your wind is fairly tight. A loose wind kind of doesn't enable you to control your sound very much. There, that should be perfect. We're doing a clockwise wind. You want to start slow. When I say slow, I mean like 1500 RPM. You're going to wind up doing about 2000 RPM when it's toward the end. But the fact that that wire's higher doesn't matter. It's going to all flatten out eventually. You just want to get it covered. But it's important to have the pressure on there, because you want it to look like that. So then you start back up again. You want to check it every once in a while. Make sure you're not having any wire runoff. Because once that happens, you have to start all over again. There's no splicing the wire together. You want to take your time. Don't get impatient. Before you know it, you'll be at your winds that you want to have. Alright, we are now going to use our black wire, which is the finished lead for me on the screw bobbin. I'll be kind of back here. I'll leave that hang. Find that in a minute. So I'm going to do the same type of thing. I'm going to unwind just a hair to get this started. Don't want to get several winds on there, just oops, it's a little tricky this part sometimes. But we're going to edit that. So same type of thing, we're going to just tape it in place. Solder on there. That's more than enough. And we take our shrink tubing. We're going to use the black this time. I intentionally left this lead long. We're going to be trimming that back quite a bit. This is 1/16 shrink tubing. It was the smallest I could find. So now we're going to bring this back to where it comes out at the same side as the other. Now it's not necessary to roll that off the whole thing. In fact, it'll probably cause you more aggravation than it's worth. I've seen some guys use Teflon tape in here. I just kind of like using the, this is pickup tape. I kind of like it better for this application. You want to press that down in there. Oh good, I think we're going to do one more revolution just to make sure that we're totally protected. That's what you're doing, is protecting the coil with this more than anything. We're going to wax pop this pickup as well. There we go. Alright, so there's our screw coil ready to rock. And our start wire on this one is going to be white. Alright, so we're going to peel back our other lead. We only need a little bit, really. Up here again. Take our soldering iron and solder that sucker right on there. I like to put the solder on the iron first. This way it flows a little better. As you can see, this is fairly delicate. So you don't need to go crazy. Alright, so there's our start lead. We're going to trim two areas back. We're going to trim the extra copper lead back, or the extra, coil wire back. There we go. Then we're going to take our shrink tubing, slide her on there. Just go long enough to where you cover everything. Okay. Now the other thing we want to make sure, this wire is so hard to see, is that one in the right location for that. Okay. That looks good. careful. The wire is very delicate. Want to make sure your tape sits as flat as you can get it. Alright, so that's our starting point right there. So it's the same procedure all over again. Just want to hand start it until you catch up to your slacked wire. And that's called a scatter line for a reason. So every pickup that you make, when you do it like this, no two will be exactly the same. Now machine wound pickups, you can duplicate that pickup every single time. But a lot of people seem to think they lack a little soul sometimes. I tend to agree. It's not just a matter of resistance. There's something about the wind that definitely influences the characteristics of the pickup. Alright, now before you assemble this thing, you want to make sure that you have continuity. Alright, so that's a good time to check your resistance, but if you're getting a zero on your meter, obviously you've got a break in the wire somewhere, so you may have to start over again. In our case, both of these tested out just right, just where they should be, so we're going to move on to the next step. This is by far the most tedious part of the job. Now the reason I'm doing this by hand instead of using a drill is because I don't want to scratch the surface of the bobbin. You're much more likely to fly off the screw with the drill than you are when you're doing it this way. Alright, so now we load this through our spacer. And we load it this way through here. So this. So our magnet is going to go that way. Putting our bevels to the top. Alright, so we want to leave this hole clear because we're going to run these wires between the two bobbins when we attach. So we're just going to lightly screw this one in just to kind of hold everything in place. We want to ensure our magnet is pushed all the way over and it's centered on the bottom plate. Okay. That's good. We may need to trim that down a little bit because it seems it may be a little too wide. So we're going to do our hookups, but we're not going to screw this side in yet because we may have to lift it out in order to make room to get our lead wire down through there. So that is all we're going to need for that. Okay, so at this point, we're going to connect our wiring. Alright, so we're going to go from a 4 lead, which is what we have here, to 2 leads. because we're not going to do any coil splitting. So this is our start on this coil, and this is our finish on this coil. On this coil, this is our finish, and this is our start. So we want to connect the two finish wires together. We'll do that first, so we'll strip those. So these two are just going to get soldered together. Then we're going to put shrink tubing over that. So let's go ahead and do that. I just left them long. So now we know these are solid together. We're going to fit about that much on there. Gotcha. I want to leave a little slack because I'm going to tuck that in there. That's going to get tucked in. Now this is going to be our hot lead, which is going to get connected to this. And then this is going to be our ground, which is going to get smoky. Actually, it's going to get connected to this and this. But we also are going to shrink tube the connections. So what we want to do, we want to put that on the wire, because if we don't ahead of time, there's no way we're going to get enough. We'll cut another piece off about the same length here. And we'll put that on the ground wire. So I'm going to strip a little bit away just to make it easier to make our connections. Now the whole reason for these lead wires is just imagine using a 43 gauge wire and trying to do all this and tucking in here without breaking anything. Highly unlikely. Pull this back a little bit. Get a good solder connection. Even though it's pushed back, it still gets frayed. If you cut it at one point, we're going to solder our hot lead on in this joint. Do the same thing with our ground. We're going to preload that as well. Put those together. Alright, so as I thought, we are going to have to pull this out a little bit. Everything's going to get tucked in the metal here. Now the tape that we use to put these together is what's going to keep these things from being super visible. So we'll slide this back in. Now once we wax pot these won't be so easy to come out. So now we're going to screw this side in. Now we're just going to attach these in, or attach this in tight. We want to get that. Now we're going to wax pot these like I said. You want to be careful not to have too much heat on that. That will distort the plastic on here. We're going to back this out just a hair. Get that through the hole. On the bottom. That is the way we want to make this tight. We're going to tighten up the screw again. again. Now this is set up for obviously the right-hand guitar, because your wire, your lead is going to go this way. This is toward the bridge. You're in good shape. Our magnet is centered in there. Everything's centered, screwed together tight. Now before we get crazy, we probably want to make sure we didn't lose anything before we go wax potting that thing. And we want to make sure that we still have what we need, because anything can happen. So there we go. So we're going to go on here, there, excellent. So we still have continuity through our pickup. Everything's going to be super duper. It's going to have a lot of gain to it, but that's why we're using the Alnico 2 instead of an Alnico 5. If we used a 5, it probably would be a little brittle sounding. I don't think anybody loves that. Now we're going to do our final wraps on this thing. We want our pickup completely protected. So I'm going to start in the middle over here. Then we're going to go one more time around with the thicker one, and that's to tie everything together. After I get done taping this, we are going to throw some solder on that. So now this is to cover the entire thing. Really finish it off. That's all we need. Just enough to keep a great connection up there. In fact, we're going to shoot some in here too. That's plenty good enough. Now our soldering is done until we mount this sucker in the guitar. Push down real good. Don't. When you go to wax potting, it's going to want to unravel a little bit. There we go. This is the Primal tone bridge pickup. I'm going to wax pot it now. There's nothing crazy about the wax potting. All you have to do, I use a small crock pot. I have it set on low. In fact, once the wax is melted, I turn it off, because what happens is it keeps getting hotter. And like I say, you don't want to distort plastic properties. We're about to go do that right now. I don't think I need to video that. Basically, I'm going to submerge this in hot wax. It's a combination of beeswax and paraffin wax. And I'm going to leave it in there for about 10 minutes just to get all the windings covered. Thanks for watching today. I hope you found this video educational, informative, and entertaining. As always, please like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.